David Thompson felt the pain start during breakfast. It began as a dull ache in his chest, like someone was pressing down hard with their hand. He tried to ignore it at first. He had lesson plans to finish for his history class. But the pain got worse. It spread to his left arm and up into his jaw. His wife Angela looked at him from across the kitchen table. She knew something was wrong. David's face had gone pale, and sweat was forming on his forehead even though the house was cool. "David, you don't look good," she said, putting down her coffee cup. "I'm okay," he said, but his voice was tight. "Just some indigestion, I think." Angela stood up and walked around the table. She touched his shoulder. "That's not indigestion. We're going to the hospital." David wanted to argue. He had so much to do. His students were waiting for him. There were papers to grade and a parent meeting after school. But another wave of pain hit him stronger this time. It took his breath away. "Okay," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." They got in the car and Angela drove fast but carefully to Riverside Medical Center. It was the biggest hospital in their city. David leaned back in the passenger seat, trying to breathe slowly. The pain wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. When they reached the emergency room, Angela helped him out of the car. David could walk, but each step felt heavy. They went through the automatic doors into the bright, cold waiting area. The smell of cleaning products and something else, something medical, filled the air. Angela went straight to the desk where a nurse sat behind a computer. "My husband needs help," Angela said. Her voice was urgent but controlled. "He has severe chest pain." "It's been getting worse." The nurse looked up. She was a white woman in her 30s with tired eyes. She glanced at David, then back at her computer screen. "Name?" "David Thompson," Angela said. "Date of birth?" Angela gave her the information. The nurse typed slowly, asking more questions. "Insurance information." "Emergency contact." "Previous medical history." David stood there, one hand pressed against his chest, trying not to show how much pain he was in. "Take a seat," the nurse finally said, pointing to the waiting area. "Someone will call you." "But his chest pain is really bad," Angela said. "Shouldn't someone see him right away?" The nurse barely looked up. "We have to triage everyone. Take a seat, please. Next." David touched Angela's arm gently. "It's okay," he said softly. "Let's just sit down." They found 2 chairs near the window. David sat down carefully, each movement sending new sparks of pain through his chest. Angela sat next to him, her hand holding his. She kept looking at him, then at the desk, then back at him. The waiting room was full of people. Some looked sick, some looked bored, some looked scared. David watched as other patients came in after them. A young white woman with a sprained ankle, an older white man with a cough, a white couple with a child who had a fever. One by one, these patients were called back. The young woman went first, even though she was laughing with someone on her phone. Then the older man. Then the couple with their child. David and Angela kept waiting. An hour passed. Then 2 hours. David's pain was getting worse. He was sweating more now, and his breathing had become shallow. Angela went back to the desk. "Excuse me," she said to the same nurse. "My husband has been waiting for 2 hours. He really needs to see a doctor." The nurse sighed. "Ma'am, everyone here needs to see a doctor. You have to wait your turn." "But people who came in after us have already been seen," Angela said. She was trying hard to stay calm. "They had different priority levels," the nurse said. Her tone suggested the conversation was over. Angela came back to David. Her eyes were angry, but she kept her voice gentle when she spoke to him. "How are you feeling?" "Not great," David admitted. The truth was he felt terrible. The pain was constant now, a crushing weight on his chest. His left arm felt numb and tingly. He knew these were warning signs. He taught health education as part of his history lessons when they covered wars and medical advances. He knew what a heart attack could feel like, but he also knew something else. He had lived 45 years as a black man in America. He had learned when to speak up and when to stay quiet. He had learned to be patient in situations where others didn't have to be. He had learned to observe and remember, so he watched. He watched as more people came in and were seen before him. He noted the times on the clock on the wall. He listened to the conversations at the desk. He saw which patients got immediate attention and which ones were told to wait. He saw the pattern. He understood it completely. But showing his anger wouldn't help him right now. It might even make things worse. 3 hours passed. David's shirt was soaked with sweat. His face had turned gray. Angela was crying now, frustrated and scared. "David, something is really wrong," she whispered. "I can see it." "Why won't they help you?" David squeezed her hand weakly. "They will," he said. "Eventually they will." Finally, after 3.5 hours, a different nurse called his name. "David Thompson?" Angela helped him stand. They followed the nurse through the doors into the emergency room area. David walked slowly, his hand still pressed to his chest. Every breath hurt now. The nurse took them to a small examination room. She checked his blood pressure and his pulse. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the numbers, but she didn't say anything. She just wrote them down on a chart. "The doctor will be with you soon," she said, and left. David sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling under him. Angela stood next to him, her hand on his back. "Soon," David repeated quietly. He looked at his watch. 3 hours and 40 minutes since they had arrived. He would remember that number. Dr. Richard Whitmore walked into the examination room 20 minutes later. He was a tall white man in his early 50s with gray hair and an expensive watch. He held a clipboard and barely glanced at David before looking at the chart. "So," he said, his voice flat and uninterested. "Chest pain?" "Yes, doctor," David said. "It started this morning. It's a crushing feeling in my chest, and the pain goes down my left arm and up into my jaw." Dr. Whitmore nodded but didn't look concerned. He pulled out his stethoscope and listened to David's heart for maybe 10 seconds. Then he listened to his lungs for another 10 seconds. He put the stethoscope back around his neck. "Any other symptoms?" he asked, writing something on the chart. "Yes," David said. "I'm sweating a lot even though I don't feel hot. And I feel nauseous. My father died of a heart attack when he was 50. My uncle had bypass surgery last year." Dr. Whitmore looked up briefly. "How's your stress level?" David was confused by the question. "My stress level?" "Yes, work stress. Life stress. These symptoms can often be caused by anxiety and stress." Dr. Whitmore crossed his arms. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a high school teacher," David said. "I teach history." "High school teacher," Dr. Whitmore repeated as if that explained everything. "That can be stressful, especially in certain neighborhoods." The way he said certain neighborhoods made David's jaw tighten, but he kept his face neutral. "Doctor," Angela spoke up from her chair in the corner. "He's been in pain for hours. Shouldn't you run some tests? An EKG, blood work?" Dr. Whitmore finally looked at Angela. His expression was annoyed. "Ma'am, I'm the doctor here. I know what tests are necessary." He turned back to David. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I see this all the time. People come into the ER thinking they're having a heart attack, and it turns out to be stress, anxiety, or simple indigestion. Your heart sounds fine. Your lungs sound fine. But my blood pressure," David said calmly. The nurse seemed concerned about the reading. "Your blood pressure is elevated, yes," Dr. Whitmore said. "But that's probably because you're anxious about being in the hospital. It's common in your community to have high blood pressure. Diet, lifestyle choices, those things add up." David felt the sting of those words. "My community," he repeated quietly. "African Americans have higher rates of hypertension," Dr. Whitmore continued, as if he was giving a lecture. "It's well documented. You need to watch your salt intake, lose some weight, exercise more. How much do you exercise?" "I walk every day," David said. "And I coach the school basketball team." Dr. Whitmore didn't seem to hear him. He was writing on his chart. "I'm going to prescribe some antacids for the chest discomfort. It's probably acid reflux, very common. Also, you should consider seeing a therapist about stress management. Maybe your regular doctor can refer you." Angela stood up. "Doctor, you're not listening. He has a family history of heart disease. He has classic heart attack symptoms. Shouldn't you at least run an EKG to be safe?" Dr. Whitmore's face hardened. "Ma'am, I have been practicing medicine for 25 years. I know the difference between a cardiac event and anxiety. Your husband is having a panic attack or severe indigestion. Running unnecessary tests wastes time and money. There are people here with real emergencies." The words hung in the air. Real emergencies. As if David's pain wasn't real. As if his symptoms didn't matter. David felt something inside him go very still. He had felt this feeling before many times in his life. It was the feeling of being dismissed, of being invisible, of being judged before he even opened his mouth. But he had learned long ago that showing anger in these situations often made things worse. "Doctor," David said, his voice steady and polite, "I understand your experience, but I know my body. This feels different from anything I've experienced before. The pain is severe. Could we please do just one EKG, just to be certain? Dr. Whitmore sighed heavily, as if David was being difficult. Mr. Thompson, you're a high school teacher, not a doctor. I'm telling you, based on my examination, that you don't need an EKG. What you need is to go home, take the antacids I'm prescribing, and relax. Stop eating so much fried food. Get some rest. If the pain continues for more than a week, see your primary care doctor. A week? Angela said, her voice rising. You want him to wait a week if this pain continues? If it's still bothering you in a week, yes, follow up with your regular doctor, Dr. Whitmore said. He ripped a prescription off his pad and handed it to David. Take these twice a day, and try to calm down. Stress kills, you know. He moved toward the door. Dr. Whitmore, David said. The doctor stopped and turned. Could you please note in my chart exactly what I told you? About the pain in my chest, my arm, my jaw, about my family history? Dr. Whitmore looked irritated. It's all in the chart, Mr. Thompson. Could you please make sure it's detailed? David asked. His voice was still calm, still polite. I'd like a complete record of this visit. Why? Dr. Whitmore asked suspiciously. For my records, David said simply. Dr. Whitmore stared at him for a moment, then shrugged. Fine, it's all documented. Now I have other patients who actually need medical attention. You're free to go. He left the room. The door swung shut behind him. Angela stood frozen for a moment, then she walked over to David. I can't believe this, she whispered. He didn't even examine you properly. He was in here for less than 5 minutes. David carefully got down from the examination table. His chest still hurt. The pain hadn't lessened at all. If anything, it felt worse. But he moved slowly and deliberately. Let's go home, he said quietly. David, maybe we should go to another hospital, Angela said. Something is really wrong. I know it. Let's just go home, David repeated. He picked up the prescription from the counter where Dr. Whitmore had left it. I need to think. As they walked through the emergency room and back out to the waiting area, David looked around. He saw the nurse at the desk typing on her computer. He saw the other patients still waiting. He saw Dr. Whitmore through a window, laughing with another doctor holding a cup of coffee. David noted everything. He had a good memory, trained by years of teaching history and journalism before that. He remembered times, names, exact words that were said. He remembered the way Dr. Whitmore had looked at him, or rather, had looked through him. In the parking lot, Angela helped him into the car even though he insisted he was fine. She drove home slowly, glancing at him every few seconds. Are you going to take those antacids? She asked. David looked at the prescription in his hand. No, he said quietly. What are you going to do? David was quiet for a long moment. The pain in his chest was constant now, a heavy pressure that made it hard to breathe deeply. He knew something was seriously wrong. His body was telling him so, but Dr. Whitmore had dismissed him completely. I'm going to pay attention, David finally said. I'm going to remember everything, and I'm going to see what happens next. Angela looked at him, worried and confused, but David's face was calm. Behind his eyes, though, his mind was working, recording, storing, waiting. 2 days later, David stood in front of his classroom. He had taken the antacids Dr. Whitmore prescribed, but they hadn't helped at all. The pain in his chest came and went in waves. Sometimes it was just a dull ache. Other times it was sharp and made him stop whatever he was doing. Angela had begged him to stay home, but David was stubborn. His students were in the middle of studying the civil rights movement, and he didn't want to leave them with a substitute teacher. This was important history. It mattered. Today we're going to talk about the courage it took to stand up against injustice, David said to his class of 30 teenagers. They sat at their desks, some paying attention, some looking at their phones under their desks, some just staring out the window. David walked to the board and picked up a marker. He started to write the date, March 7, 1965, Bloody Sunday. But as he raised his arm, a wave of pain hit him so hard that he gasped. The marker fell from his hand and clattered to the floor. Mr. Thompson, a girl in the front row said. Are you okay? David put his hand on the board to steady himself. I'm fine, he said, but his voice sounded strange even to himself. Just give me a second. He tried to bend down to pick up the marker, but another wave of pain crashed through his chest. This one was different. It was crushing, like an elephant sitting on his ribs. He couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. Mr. Thompson, several students shouted at once. David's legs gave out. He fell to his knees first, then onto his side. The floor was cold against his cheek. He could hear his students screaming, but their voices sounded far away, like they were at the end of a long tunnel. A student, a boy named Jerome, ran to David's side. "Someone call 911, Jerome shouted. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Another student, a girl named Lisa, ran out into the hallway screaming for help. David tried to talk, tried to tell them he was okay, but no words came out. The pain was everywhere now. His chest, his arm, his jaw, his back. It felt like his body was being torn apart from the inside. He could hear Jerome talking to the 911 operator. "Yes, our teacher collapsed. He's on the floor. He's not talking. His eyes are open, but he looks really scared. Please hurry. Lincoln High School, room 204. More teachers rushed into the room. Mr. Peters from next door. Ms. Jackson from across the hall. They moved the students back, giving David space. Someone put something soft under his head. "David, can you hear me?" Ms. Jackson said, kneeling beside him. "The ambulance is coming. Just hold on." David wanted to tell her about the hospital visit 2 days ago. He wanted to tell her about Dr. Whitmore, but he couldn't make his mouth work. All he could do was lie there, feeling his heart beating wrong in his chest, too fast and too hard, like it was trying to break free. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. Though it felt like hours to David, the paramedics rushed in with their equipment. They asked him questions he couldn't answer. They put an oxygen mask on his face. They attached sticky pads to his chest connected to wires and a machine. One paramedic, a young black man, looked at the machine and his face went serious. "We need to move now," he said to his partner. "Possible myocardial infarction, heart attack." Even in his pain, David's teacher brain registered the medical term. They lifted him onto a stretcher. David caught a glimpse of his students' faces as they wheeled him out. They looked scared. Jerome was crying. Lisa had her hand over her mouth. These were his kids. He had taught many of them since they were freshmen. He wanted to tell them it would be okay, but he still couldn't speak. The ambulance ride was fast. Sirens wailing. The paramedics working over him, talking in quick medical language he couldn't quite follow. Starting an IV, giving him aspirin to chew. Checking his blood pressure again and again. They took him to the same hospital. Riverside Medical Center. But this time was different. This time they rushed him in through special doors. This time nurses and doctors swarmed around him immediately. This time no one made him wait. A different doctor appeared above him. An Asian woman with kind eyes and quick hands. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Chen. You're having a heart attack. We're going to take care of you. Can you squeeze my hand if you understand?" David squeezed her hand. "Good," Dr. Chen said. "We're going to run some tests and then get you into surgery. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Everything became a blur of lights and movement. Tests he didn't understand. Machines beeping. People in scrubs moving around him with purpose. Someone asked about his medical history. Someone else asked about allergies. Through it all, David felt the pain in his chest. Constant and terrible. At some point, Angela arrived. He could hear her voice, high and scared, talking to Dr. Chen in the hallway outside his room. "When did the symptoms start?" Dr. Chen asked. 2 days ago, Angela said, and David could hear the tears in her voice. "We brought him to the ER here 2 days ago. He was having chest pain, pain in his arm, sweating, all the classic symptoms. But the doctor said it was just stress and anxiety. He sent us home with antacids." There was a pause. Then Dr. Chen's voice, tight with controlled anger. "Who was the doctor?" "Dr. Whitmore," Angela said, another pause. "Longer this time. I see," Dr. Chen said finally. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. Your husband has significant blockage in his arteries. He's been having a heart attack for at least 2 days, possibly longer. If he had been properly diagnosed when he first came in, we could have prevented a lot of damage." David heard Angela make a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. "How bad is it?" she asked. "We won't know the full extent until after surgery," Dr. Chen said. "But I'm going to do everything I can. He's strong. He got himself here. That counts for a lot." They wheeled David to the operating room. The last thing he saw before the anesthesia took him was Angela's face above his, her hands holding his face gently. "I love you," she whispered. "Fight, you hear me? Fight." David wanted to tell her that he was a fighter, that he had been fighting his whole life in quiet ways and loud ways, that he would fight this too. But the drugs pulled him down into darkness before he could speak. When he woke up, hours had passed. He was in a different room. Tubes and wires connected him to machines. His chest hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt now. A surgical hurt. A healing hurt. Angela was asleep in a chair next to his bed, her head resting on the side of his mattress, her hand holding his. The morning sun was coming through the window. David looked at her and felt a wave of love so strong it almost hurt more than his chest. She had been right. She had known something was seriously wrong. She had tried to make them listen. Dr. Chen came in quietly, not wanting to wake Angela. But Angela stirred and lifted her head. "He's awake," Dr. Chen said with a gentle smile. "Mr. Thompson, how are you feeling?" David's mouth was dry. His voice came out as a whisper. "Alive." "Yes, you are," Dr. Chen said. "You're lucky. Another day, maybe even another few hours, and we might not have been able to save you. You had a 95% blockage in your main artery. We put in 2 stents. You're going to need time to recover, but you should be able to live a normal, healthy life." David nodded slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair. Her face became serious. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about your previous visit to this hospital. I've reviewed Dr. Whitmore's notes. They're inadequate. He did a minimal examination and dismissed your symptoms without proper testing. This is not acceptable." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you want to file a complaint, I will support you completely. I will document everything. What happened to you should never happen to anyone." David looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Angela, who was watching him with red, tired eyes. "Yes," David said, his voice getting stronger. "Document everything. I want every detail written down." Dr. Chen nodded. "I will, and Mr. Thompson?" I'm sorry our system failed you." David closed his eyes. He was tired, so tired. But his mind was already working, already planning. He had always taught his students that change didn't happen by accident. It happened when people refused to stay silent, when people gathered evidence, when people stood up, even when standing up was hard. He had almost died because someone didn't see him as human enough to deserve proper care. Someone had looked at his skin color and made assumptions. Someone had dismissed his pain as if it didn't matter. But he was alive, and he was a teacher. And teachers knew how to research, how to document, how to build a case. This wasn't over. In fact, David thought as he drifted back to sleep, it was just beginning. David spent 5 days in the hospital after his surgery, 5 days of lying in a bed connected to machines, healing slowly. But his mind wasn't resting. His mind was working. Before he became a teacher, David had been an investigative journalist for 10 years. He had worked for a small newspaper, digging into stories that others overlooked. He knew how to find information. He knew how to ask the right questions. He knew how to be patient and thorough. On the 2nd day after his surgery, when Angela went home to shower and change clothes, David asked the nurse for his phone. She hesitated, but he smiled at her and promised he would rest. "Just need to let my students know I'm okay," he said. The nurse, a woman named Patricia, smiled back. Patricia was black, probably in her 40s. She had been taking good care of him. "Okay, but just for a little while. You need to rest." When she left, David opened his phone and started searching. He began with Riverside Medical Center's website. He looked up Dr. Whitmore's profile. 26 years at the hospital. Medical degree from a good university. Specialization in emergency medicine. Nothing unusual there. Then David went to the websites where patients could leave reviews about doctors. He typed in Dr. Whitmore's name. What he found made his chest tighten, and not from his heart condition. Review after review from black and brown patients. Complaints about being dismissed, about not being listened to, about pain being ignored. One review from a woman named Maria Rodriguez. "Dr. Whitmore told my mother she was being dramatic when she came in with severe headache and dizziness. He said Hispanic women are known for overreacting to pain. He sent her home. She had a stroke the next day. She died." Another review from a man named James Wilson. "I came in with an infected cut on my leg. Dr. Whitmore barely looked at it. He said black people have higher pain tolerance and I should stop complaining. The infection spread. I almost lost my leg. I have permanent nerve damage now." David read review after review. His hands shook as he scrolled. There were dozens of them. Years of them. All with the same pattern. Black and brown patients being dismissed, being treated like their pain didn't matter, being sent away without proper care. But there was something else he noticed. Mixed in with the bad reviews were glowing reviews from white patients, praising Dr. Whitmore's care and attention, saying he was thorough and kind. David took screenshots of everything. He created a folder on his phone, organizing the reviews by date. When Patricia came back to check on him, David asked her a question. "Have you worked with Dr. Whitmore?" Patricia's face changed. She became very careful. "Why do you ask?" "He was the one who sent me home 2 days before my heart attack," David said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand." Patricia looked at the door, then back at David. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Thompson, I shouldn't say anything." "I understand," David said, "but off the record. Just between us. I almost died." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "He has a reputation," she said softly, "among the nursing staff. We've noticed patterns, but when we try to say something, nothing happens. He's been here a long time. He brings in a lot of money for the hospital. No one wants to hear complaints about him." "What kind of patterns?" David asked. Patricia shook her head. "I really can't say more. I could lose my job." But then she added very quietly, "Check the patient complaint records, if you can get access to them." She left quickly after that. David thought about what she said. Patient complaint records. Those would be internal hospital documents. He couldn't just ask for them. But he could file his own complaint. And when he did, maybe he could talk to other people who had complained. The next day, Dr. Chen came to check on him. David asked her how to file a formal complaint. "I was hoping you would ask," Dr. Chen said. She sat down in the chair next to his bed. "I've already started documenting everything. I've written a detailed report about your case. But you need to file an official complaint with the hospital's patient advocacy office. They're required to investigate." "Have other patients complained about Dr. Whitmore?" David asked. Dr. Chen's face tightened. "I can't discuss other patients with you, but I can tell you that your case concerns me deeply. The standard of care you received was not acceptable." She helped him fill out the complaint form right there in his hospital room. David wrote down everything. The long wait in the emergency room. Dr. Whitmore's dismissive attitude. The assumptions about his lifestyle and stress levels. The refusal to run basic cardiac tests despite classic symptoms and family history. The prescription for antacids when he was having a heart attack. "What happens now?" David asked when he finished. "The patient advocacy office will review it," Dr. Chen said. "They're supposed to investigate and respond within 30 days. Honestly, though, Mr. Thompson, I don't want to give you false hope. These complaints often don't go anywhere. The hospital protects its doctors." "I understand," David said. But in his mind, he was already planning his next steps. When Angela came back that evening, she brought his laptop. "I thought you might want to work on some lesson plans," she said, "to keep your mind busy while you recover." David did use the laptop, but not for lesson plans. He created a detailed timeline. His first ER visit, the exact time he arrived, how long he waited, the names of everyone he could remember, what Dr. Whitmore said word for word, his collapse at school, the second arrival at the hospital, Dr. Chen's surgery, everything. He also started researching medical discrimination. He found studies, statistics, stories. It was worse than he had imagined. Black patients being undertreated for pain, Black women dying in childbirth at much higher rates than white women, Black children with appendicitis being given less pain medication than white children. It was all there, documented in medical journals and research papers. Systemic bias, implicit prejudice, racism in healthcare. One night, while Angela slept in the chair next to him, David composed an email on his laptop. He sent it to 5 of his former colleagues from his journalism days. The subject line was simple: "Need help with an investigation." By morning, all 5 had responded. They wanted to help. David also joined an online support group for people who had experienced medical discrimination. He read their stories. Some made him cry. A father who lost his daughter because her pain was dismissed. A woman who was told her cancer symptoms were just anxiety. A young man who became disabled because an infection wasn't treated properly. In the group, David posted his own story. He didn't use Dr. Whitmore's name yet. He just described what happened. Within hours, people responded. Some with sympathy, some with rage, and some with information. 3 different people private messaged him. They had all been treated by Dr. Whitmore. They had all filed complaints. Nothing had happened. One woman, Maria Rodriguez, wrote, "My mother died because of that doctor. I tried to sue, but the hospital lawyers buried everything. They said I couldn't prove he was negligent. They said my mother's stroke could have happened anyway. They paid me a small settlement to go away quietly. But I never went away in my heart. I've been waiting for someone to do something," David wrote back to her. "I'm a teacher and a former journalist. I know how to investigate. I know how to build a case. Would you be willing to share your mother's medical records with me?" Maria responded immediately. "Yes, anything. Someone needs to stop him." Another man, James Wilson, sent David his medical records too, and photographs of his damaged leg, and the complaint he had filed that went nowhere. A third person, a young woman named Keisha, shared her story of being dismissed when she came in with severe abdominal pain. Dr. Whitmore told her she was probably just having bad period cramps. She actually had a ruptured ovarian cyst. By the time another doctor saw her the next day, the infection had spread. She nearly died. By the time David was released from the hospital a week after his surgery, he had a file folder on his laptop with 43 pages of information: medical records, complaint forms, reviews, timelines, names, dates, patterns. At home, Angela set him up in their guest bedroom with pillows and blankets. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, looking at his laptop with concern. "I am resting," David said. "This is actually keeping my stress down. It's giving me purpose." Angela sat on the edge of the bed. "David, I know that look. You're in investigation mode. Just promise me you won't overdo it. You just had heart surgery." "I promise," David said. And he meant it. He would rest. He would heal. But he would also work, because what he had discovered in just 1 week was bigger than he had imagined. Dr. Whitmore wasn't just one bad doctor. He was a symptom of a bigger problem, and that problem had been allowed to continue for years because no one person had all the pieces. But David was good at putting pieces together. It was what he had done as a journalist. It was what he did as a history teacher, showing his students how individual events connected to create larger patterns of injustice. He looked at the file on his laptop. 43 pages now. But he knew there were more stories out there. More patients. More complaints. More evidence. He just had to find it. And then he had to figure out what to do with it. David opened a new document and started typing. At the top of the page he wrote, "The case against Dr. Richard Whitmore, a pattern of medical discrimination." Then he started writing everything he knew. 3 weeks after his surgery, David felt strong enough to leave the house for more than doctor's appointments. His chest still hurt sometimes, but it was healing. Dr. Chen had told him he was recovering well. She also told him that the hospital's patient advocacy office had received his complaint and was looking into it. David knew what that meant. It meant nothing was happening, but David had been busy. Every day while Angela was at work and he was home recovering, he spent hours on his laptop, researching, organizing, reaching out. He had connected with 7 patients who had been treated by Dr. Whitmore and had similar experiences. 7 people whose pain had been dismissed, whose symptoms had been ignored, whose lives had been changed by one doctor's prejudice. Today, David was meeting 3 of them in person. He drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town. His hands were steady on the wheel. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but he also knew he needed to listen. These people had their own stories, their own pain. This wasn't just about him anymore. Maria Rodriguez was already there when he arrived. She was a woman in her 60s with sad eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. She stood when she saw him and hugged him like they were old friends, even though they had never met in person. "Thank you for coming," David said. "Thank you for doing this," Maria replied. Her voice shook slightly. "My mother died 3 years ago. 3 years, and I still wake up angry every single day." They sat down at a corner table. A few minutes later, James Wilson arrived. He was a tall black man, probably in his 30s, walking with a cane. He limped over to their table and sat down with a grimace. "Bad day," James said, tapping his leg. "The nerve damage acts up when it rains." The last person to arrive was Keisha Brown, a young woman in her 20s with braids and bright, angry eyes. She sat down and immediately said, "Tell me you have a plan. Tell me we're finally going to do something about that man." David looked at the 3 of them. These were people who had been hurt by the same system that had almost killed him. They were strangers, but they were also connected by their pain and their desire for justice. "I have the beginning of a plan," David said carefully, "but I need to know if you're willing to go public with your stories. This won't be easy. The hospital will fight back. They'll try to protect Dr. Whitmore. They'll bring up anything they can to discredit us." "Let them try," Keisha said. "I'm done being quiet," Maria nodded. "My mother can't speak for herself anymore, so I'll speak for her." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've spent 3 years trying to forget what happened to me, trying to move on. But I can't. Every time I walk with this cane, I remember, if there's a chance to stop him from hurting someone else, I have to take it." David felt something tight in his chest loosen. Not pain this time, relief. He wasn't alone in this. He pulled out a folder from his bag. Inside were printed copies of everything he had gathered. Medical records, complaint forms, timeline charts, statistical analysis showing the pattern of Dr. Whitmore's treatment of white patients versus patients of color. "I was an investigative journalist before I became a teacher," David said. "I know how to build a case. But I can't do this alone. I need your permission to use your stories. I need your medical records, and I need your willingness to go on record, possibly in court, possibly in the media." For the next 2 hours they talked. They shared their stories in detail. Maria told them about her mother's last day, how she had complained of a terrible headache and dizziness, how Dr. Whitmore had barely examined her before sending her home, how she had collapsed the next morning, how she had died in the ambulance. James showed them pictures of his leg, the infection that had spread because Dr. Whitmore dismissed it as minor, the surgeries he had to endure, the permanent damage. Keisha described her pain, her fear, and the way Dr. Whitmore had actually laughed when she said she was worried. "He told me young women always think everything is an emergency," she said, her voice bitter. "He said I was probably just having cramps and being dramatic. I almost died from sepsis." David listened to each story, taking notes, asking gentle questions. His journalist training came back easily. He knew how to interview people. He knew how to make them feel heard. When they finished talking, David laid out his plan. "First, we need a lawyer," he said. "Not just any lawyer. We need someone who specializes in medical malpractice and civil rights. Someone who isn't afraid to take on a big hospital." "I know someone," Maria said suddenly. "When I was trying to sue after my mother died, I talked to a lot of lawyers. Most of them didn't want to touch the case. But there was one woman, Elena Martinez. She said she couldn't take my case at the time because she didn't have enough evidence of a pattern, but she told me if I ever found other victims to come back to her." David wrote down the name. "I'll contact her." "Second," David continued, "we need more victims. I've found 7 people online, but there have to be more. Dr. Whitmore has been at that hospital for over 25 years. If he's been doing this the whole time, there could be dozens, maybe hundreds of people he's hurt." "How do we find them?" James asked. "We tell our story publicly," David said. "We reach out to local media. We post in community groups online. We ask people to come forward, but we have to be smart about it. We need to build an airtight case before we go public. Otherwise, the hospital will shut us down." Keisha leaned forward. "What about the hospital? Have they responded to your complaint yet?" "They sent me a letter saying they're investigating," David said. "But I don't expect anything to come from it. Hospitals protect their own. I've researched this. Unless there's massive public pressure or legal action, internal complaints usually get buried. So we need to create that pressure," Maria said. "Exactly," David agreed. "We need to make it impossible for them to ignore us." Over the next hour, they divided up tasks. Maria would reach out to Elena Martinez, the lawyer. James would start contacting community organizations and patient advocacy groups. Keisha would create a private social media group where victims could share their stories safely. David would continue researching and organizing all the evidence. Before they left, David said something that had been on his mind since his surgery. "I want you all to know that I'm not doing this out of anger," he said. "I mean, I am angry. What happened to all of us is wrong. But anger alone doesn't change systems. My students are studying the civil rights movement right now. And one thing I teach them is that the activists who created real change were strategic. They were organized. They documented everything. They built cases that were impossible to deny." He paused, looking at each of them. "That's what we're going to do. We're going to build a case that's so well documented, so thoroughly researched, so clearly showing a pattern of discrimination that the hospital, the medical board, and the public will have no choice but to act. How long will that take? Keisha asked. I don't know, David admitted. Could be months. Could be longer. But if we do this right, if we're patient and thorough, we can create real change, not just for us, but for every patient who comes after us. They all stood and shook hands. Then, because it felt right, they hugged. 4 strangers brought together by pain, now united by purpose. After they left, David sat in his car for a few minutes before driving home. He felt tired but energized. His chest ached a little, reminding him to take his medication. He pulled out his phone and called Angela at work. How did it go? She asked immediately. Good, David said. Really good. We're moving forward. Be careful, Angela said, her voice worried. The hospital has a lot of power, a lot of money. I know, David said, but so do we. We have something more powerful than money. We have the truth. We have evidence. And we have people who are willing to stand up. That evening, David sat at his desk and sent an email to Elena Martinez, the lawyer Maria had mentioned. He attached a summary of his research and asked if she would be willing to meet with them. She responded in less than an hour. I've been waiting for someone like you, her email said. Someone organized. Someone with evidence. Someone willing to see this through. Yes, I'll take your case. Let's meet next week and discuss strategy. What you've experienced is not just medical malpractice. It's civil rights violation, and I know how to fight those cases. David read the email 3 times. Then he called Maria, James, and Keisha to tell them the news. They had a lawyer. They had evidence. They had each other. Dr. Whitmore probably thought this was all over. Probably thought that, like all the other complaints before, this would disappear. That these patients would give up and go away. But David had taught history for 15 years. He knew that change never came from people who gave up. It came from people who refused to be quiet, from people who organized, from people who turned their pain into purpose. He opened his laptop and continued working on his case file. By now it was over 100 pages long. Medical records, testimonies, research studies on racial bias in healthcare, statistical analysis, complaint histories. He was building something bigger than a lawsuit. He was building a record, a document that would show, clearly and undeniably, that Dr. Whitmore had a pattern of discriminating against patients of color, that the hospital had known about it and done nothing, that the system had failed again and again. Angela came into his office with a cup of tea. She set it down next to his laptop and kissed the top of his head. Don't stay up too late, she said gently. You need rest. I will, David promised. But he kept working for another 2 hours, organizing, documenting, building his case piece by piece. Outside his window, the city lights glowed in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Dr. Whitmore was probably at home, comfortable, not thinking about the patients he had dismissed, not thinking about the lives he had damaged, but David was thinking about them. And he was making sure that soon everyone else would be thinking about them too. 6 months later, David stood outside the Riverside Medical Center main building. It was a cold morning in early spring. He wore his best suit, the one he saved for parent-teacher conferences and important meetings. Next to him stood Angela, Maria, James, Keisha, and 4 other patients who had come forward after they started reaching out publicly. Behind them was a small group of reporters, local news stations, a journalist from a national newspaper, a camera crew. Word had gotten out about what they were doing, and the media was interested. Elena Martinez, their lawyer, stood at the front of the group. She was a short woman with fierce eyes and a leather briefcase full of documents. Over the past 6 months, she had helped David turn his research into a legal case. A comprehensive complaint filed with the state medical board. A civil lawsuit against both Dr. Whitmore and Riverside Medical Center. And today, a formal presentation to the hospital's board of directors. Everyone ready? Elena asked, looking back at the group. David nodded. He felt calm. Nervous, yes, but calm. He had spent months preparing for this moment. He knew exactly what he was going to say. They walked into the building together. Security tried to stop the reporters, but Elena showed them the paperwork. The board meeting was technically public. The media had every right to be there. The boardroom was on the 4th floor. It was a large, fancy room with a long table and expensive-looking chairs. 7 board members sat on one side, all dressed in business suits. The hospital's CEO, a white man named Richard Crawford, sat at the head of the table. Next to him was the hospital's chief legal counsel and Dr. Whitmore himself. Dr. Whitmore looked different than David remembered. He looked smaller somehow, less confident. He stared at David with a mixture of surprise and anger. David stared back, his face calm and neutral. The board chairman, an older white man named Gerald Henderson, cleared his throat. "We've agreed to hear your presentation, Ms. Martinez, but I want to make it clear that we've conducted our own internal investigation, and we found no evidence of wrongdoing." "Of course you didn't," Elena said smoothly. "That's why we're here. To show you the evidence you apparently missed." She opened her briefcase and pulled out several thick folders. She handed copies to each board member. "What you have in front of you," Elena began, "is a comprehensive analysis of Dr. Richard Whitmore's treatment patterns over the past 5 years. We've documented 63 cases where patients of color came to the emergency room with serious symptoms and were dismissed, misdiagnosed, or given inadequate care by Dr. Whitmore." The board members opened their folders. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed discomfort. "These aren't just complaints," Elena continued. "These are medical records, documentation, statistical analysis. We've compared Dr. Whitmore's treatment of white patients versus patients of color. The difference is striking and impossible to ignore." She pulled out a large chart and set it on an easel. It showed 2 columns of data, clearly labeled. Average wait times, tests ordered, pain medication prescribed, follow-up care provided. In every category, there was a significant difference based on the patient's race. "White patients saw Dr. Whitmore within an average of 45 minutes, Elena said, pointing to the chart. Black and Hispanic patients waited an average of 3.5 hours. White patients with chest pain received EKGs 98% of the time. Black patients with chest pain received EKGs only 32% of the time." Dr. Whitmore stood up. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove that race had anything to do with my medical decisions. Different patients have different needs." "Sit down, Dr. Whitmore," the chairman said quietly. The doctor sat, his face red. Elena continued. "We have testimony from 8 patients who are here today. Each one came to the emergency room with serious, life-threatening conditions. Each one was dismissed by Dr. Whitmore, and each one is a person of color." She gestured to David. David Thompson came in with classic heart attack symptoms. Family history of heart disease, pain in his chest, arm, and jaw, elevated blood pressure. Dr. Whitmore spent less than 5 minutes with him, called it stress and anxiety, and sent him home with antacids. 2 days later, Mr. Thompson collapsed and nearly died. He required emergency surgery. David watched the board members' faces as Elena spoke. Some wouldn't look at him. Others looked disturbed. Elena went through each case. Maria's mother, who died from a stroke. James, who suffered permanent nerve damage. Keisha, who nearly died from sepsis. One by one, she laid out the evidence. The hospital's lawyer tried to interrupt several times, but Elena shut him down with facts and documentation. She had medical experts who reviewed the cases. She had statistical analysts who confirmed the pattern. She had everything. "Now," Elena said, "you might be wondering why no one noticed this pattern before. The answer is simple. People did notice. We have documentation of 12 formal complaints filed against Dr. Whitmore over the past 8 years. All of them from patients of color. All of them dismissed by your internal review process." She pulled out another set of documents. "Here are the complaint forms. Here are the investigation reports. Notice how brief they are. Notice how they all conclude no wrongdoing found without any substantial investigation." The chairman's face had gone pale. "We follow proper procedures for all complaints." "Your proper procedures are inadequate," Elena said, "and possibly illegal. You have a doctor who has been harming patients for years, and you did nothing to stop him because it was easier to dismiss complaints than to admit you had a problem." Dr. Whitmore stood up again. "I've dedicated my life to medicine. I've saved countless lives. These accusations are nothing but a witch hunt. These people are just looking for someone to blame for their own health problems." David had been quiet through all of this, but now he stood up. Everyone in the room looked at him. "May I speak?" David asked quietly. The chairman looked like he wanted to say no, but with the cameras in the room, he nodded. David walked to the front of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He just spoke clearly and calmly. "My name is David Thompson. I'm a high school history teacher. I teach my students about the civil rights movement, about how systems of discrimination work, about how good people can do terrible things when they don't see other people as fully human. He paused and looked directly at Dr. Whitmore. "I don't think you're evil, Dr. Whitmore. I think you're a product of a system that has taught you, consciously or unconsciously, that some lives matter less than others, that black pain isn't real pain, that brown patients are exaggerating, that we don't deserve the same level of care." Dr. Whitmore looked away. David turned to the board members. "What happened to me, to all of us in this room, isn't just about one doctor. It's about a hospital that allowed this to happen. That ignored complaints. That protected someone who was causing harm because it was easier than facing an uncomfortable truth." His voice grew stronger. "I almost died. Maria's mother did die. James will walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Keisha almost lost her ability to have children. How many more people have to be hurt before you take responsibility?" The room was completely silent. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed him with his students at a school assembly. "These are my students. Most of them are black and brown kids. They're going to grow up and need medical care. They're going to go to emergency rooms. They're going to trust doctors to see them as human beings worthy of care." He set the photo on the table in front of the board members. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to make sure that when my students need help, they'll get it. That their pain will be taken seriously. That their lives will be valued." He stepped back and sat down. The chairman looked shaken. The other board members were whispering to each other. The hospital's lawyer was writing notes frantically. Elena stood back up. "We're not just here to complain. We're here with demands. Dr. Whitmore's medical license should be suspended pending a full investigation by the state medical board. The hospital needs to implement mandatory training on implicit bias for all staff. You need to create an independent patient advocacy office that actually investigates complaints. You need to review all of Dr. Whitmore's cases from the past 10 years. And contact any patients who may have received inadequate care, and you need to compensate the victims who have been harmed." "These are outrageous demands," the hospital lawyer said. "These are reasonable demands," Elena corrected. "And if you don't meet them voluntarily, we're prepared to pursue this in court. We filed a civil lawsuit. We've filed complaints with the state medical board and the Department of Health. We've contacted the media, as you can see. This story is going to come out one way or another. The question is whether you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution." The chairman looked at Dr. Whitmore, then at his lawyer, then back at Elena. "We need time to discuss this." "You have 48 hours, Elena said. "Then we're holding a press conference with all of our evidence and all of our witnesses. The public will decide whether Riverside Medical Center cares more about protecting a discriminatory doctor or about patient safety." They left the room together. In the hallway, the reporters surrounded them with questions. Elena handled most of them, but one reporter asked David directly, "How does it feel to confront the doctor who almost let you die?" David thought about it for a moment. "It feels necessary," he said. "Change doesn't happen when we stay silent. History has taught me that." Over the next 2 days, David's phone didn't stop ringing. More patients came forward. Community organizations offered support. National civil rights groups reached out. The story was spreading. Exactly 48 hours later, Elena received a call from the hospital's lawyer. David was at her office when it came. He watched her face as she listened. When she hung up, she smiled. "They're agreeing to most of our demands. Dr. Whitmore's license is being suspended. They're implementing the training. They're creating an independent review board. They're going to compensate the victims." Maria started crying. James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Keisha let out a laugh of relief and disbelief. David felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not just for himself, but for everyone who would come after him. "This isn't over," Elena warned. "We still have the legal cases. The medical board investigation will take time. But this is a start. A real start." That night, David sat in his classroom after school. His students had decorated it with "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson" signs when he returned to teaching. He looked at their papers on the wall, their essays about justice and courage and standing up for what's right. He pulled out his phone and recorded a video. He would show it to his students tomorrow. "Today," he said to the camera, "we won something important. Not because we were angry, though we had every right to be. Not because we were loud, though our voices mattered. We won because we were prepared. Because we documented everything. Because we built a case that couldn't be denied. That's how change happens. Remember that." He ended the recording and sent it to himself. Then he sat in the quiet classroom, feeling the weight of the past 6 months lift just a little bit from his shoulders. 1 year later, David stood in front of a lecture hall at the state medical school. 200 first-year medical students sat in rows watching him. Most of them looked young and eager. Some looked nervous. All of them were paying attention. This was the 5th medical school where he had been invited to speak. His story had become a case study, taught in medical ethics classes across the country, not as a story about victimhood, but as a lesson in systemic bias and the cost of not seeing patients as individuals. "My name is David Thompson," he began, "and I'm here to tell you about the day a doctor's assumptions almost killed me." He told them the whole story. The emergency room wait, Dr. Whitmore's dismissal of his symptoms, the heart attack, the collapse, the surgery. But he also told them about what came after. The investigation, the evidence, the pattern that had gone unnoticed for years. "Here's what I want you to understand," David said, looking out at the young faces. "Dr. Whitmore probably didn't wake up that morning and decide to provide bad care to black patients. He probably didn't think of himself as racist. But bias doesn't require hatred. It just requires not seeing someone as fully human. Not believing their pain is as real as someone else's pain." He clicked to the next slide, which showed the statistical analysis Elena had presented to the hospital board. "These numbers tell a story about how unconscious bias shows up in medical decisions. Who gets tests? Who gets pain medication? Who gets believed?" A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "How do we make sure we don't make the same mistakes?" "That's the right question," David said. "First, you acknowledge that everyone has bias. Even you, even me. It's not about being a good person or a bad person. It's about being human. But once you acknowledge it, you can work to counter it." He advanced to the next slide. "Second, you listen. Really listen. When a patient tells you they're in pain, believe them. When they describe symptoms, don't let your assumptions about who they are override what they're telling you." Another student raised his hand. "But how do we know if we're making biased decisions?" "Systems," David said. "You build systems that catch bias. Mandatory EKGs for anyone with certain symptoms, regardless of who they are. Standard pain scales that have to be used for every patient. Protocols that don't leave room for assumptions. That's what Riverside Medical Center has implemented now. Not perfectly, but it's a start." After his lecture, several students came up to talk to him. Some thanked him. Some shared their own experiences of witnessing bias in medical settings. One young black woman told him quietly, "I want to be a doctor, but I'm scared I'll be treated the way you were when I'm the patient." David looked at her seriously. "That's a real fear. But you becoming a doctor means one more person in the system who understands, who will listen, who will see patients like you and me as deserving of the best care. That matters." The transformation at Riverside Medical Center had been slow but significant. Dr. Whitmore's medical license had been suspended for 2 years. He would never practice emergency medicine again. He was required to complete extensive training before he could return to medicine at all, and he would be on probation for 5 years. More importantly, the hospital had implemented real changes. Every complaint was now investigated by an independent board that included patient advocates and community members. All staff members went through mandatory implicit bias training twice a year. Wait times and treatment decisions were tracked by patient demographics and reviewed regularly for patterns. The patient advocacy office that David had helped design was fully staffed and had real power to investigate complaints and recommend changes. In the first year, they had identified 3 other doctors with concerning patterns and required them to undergo additional training and monitoring. David had also worked with Maria, James, and Keisha to create a support group for patients who had experienced medical discrimination. They met twice a month at a community center. Sometimes only a few people came. Sometimes the room was packed. They shared stories, offered resources, and helped people navigate the complaint process. Maria had become a fierce advocate. She spoke at community events, taught people about their patient rights, and had successfully lobbied for a state law requiring hospitals to track and report treatment disparities by race. James had gone back to school to become a patient advocate professionally. He now worked at a different hospital, helping patients who felt they weren't being heard. His cane was a reminder of why the work mattered. Keisha had created a social media platform where patients could share their experiences and rate doctors not just on their medical skills but on their cultural competency and how they treated patients of color. It had grown to over 50,000 users. The legal settlement had been substantial. The hospital had compensated all the victims they had identified. David had used his portion to create a scholarship fund for students from his school who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare. The scholarship included mentorship and support throughout their education. Angela had told him he didn't need to give the money away, that they could use it for their retirement, but David had shaken his head. "This isn't about money," he had said. It never was. "It's about making sure the next generation does better." Now, as David drove home from the medical school, he thought about how much had changed, but he also knew how much work remained. Medical discrimination hadn't disappeared. Bias was still present in healthcare systems across the country. Black mothers still died in childbirth at higher rates. Black children still received less pain medication. Brown patients still had to fight to be heard. But there was progress. Real measurable progress. And some of that progress had started in that emergency room waiting area where David had sat for 3.5 hours, observing, remembering, and planning. At home, Angela was making dinner. The smell of her cooking filled the house, warm and comforting. David hung up his jacket and walked into the kitchen. "How did it go?" Angela asked, stirring something on the stove. "Good," David said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Really good. Those students, they care. They want to do better. They want to learn. You're making a difference," Angela said, turning to kiss him. "I'm proud of you." "We're making a difference," David corrected. "All of us together." Later that evening, David sat at his desk grading papers. His students had written essays about modern civil rights movements. Many of them had written about healthcare justice, inspired by his story and the work he had done. One essay caught his attention. It was from a student named Jerome, the same boy who had called 911 when David collapsed in the classroom. Jerome wrote, "Mr. Thompson taught us that justice isn't about revenge. It's about change. When he almost died, he could have just been angry. But instead, he became organized. He documented everything. He found other people who were hurt. He built a case that no one could ignore. That's the kind of activism that works. Not just shouting, but strategizing. Not just anger, but evidence. I want to remember that when I fight for things I believe in." David felt tears in his eyes. This was why he taught. This was why all of it mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen, the surgeon who had saved his life. They had stayed in touch over the past year. She had become an ally in his work, speaking at conferences about the need for bias training in medical education. Her text read, "Just wanted you to know, we had a case today where a young black man came in with chest pain. Because of the new protocols, he got an EKG immediately. We caught an early heart attack. He's going to be fine. That's because of you." David stared at the text for a long time. That's because of you, not just because of him, he thought. Because of Maria and her mother. Because of James and his leg. Because of Keisha and her pain. Because of every patient who had been dismissed and hurt and ignored. Because of all of them standing together and refusing to be quiet. The next day at school, David was teaching his usual lesson on the civil rights movement. But today he added a new section. He projected a photo of himself with Maria, James, and Keisha at the hospital board meeting. "History isn't just something that happened in the past," he told his students. "It's happening right now. You're part of it. The question is, what role will you play?" He told them about strategic activism, about documentation and evidence, about finding allies and building coalitions, about staying calm when others wanted you to be emotional so they could dismiss you, about turning pain into purpose. "When I was lying on this floor," he said, pointing to the spot where he had collapsed, "I had a choice. I could give up and accept that this was just how things were. Or I could fight to change them, not with anger alone, but with preparation, with research, with community, with determination." He looked at his students, at their engaged faces, their thoughtful expressions. "You all have power, more than you know. The power to see injustice and do something about it. The power to document and organize and demand better. The power to be underestimated and then become undeniable." After class, several students stayed to talk. One asked, "Mr. Thompson, were you ever afraid during all of this? Like afraid the hospital would win?" David thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said. "Many times. Fear is normal. But I had something stronger than fear. I had purpose. I had evidence. And I had people standing with me. That's what made the difference. That evening, David attended a community meeting where the hospital's new patient advocacy director was presenting an update on the changes that had been implemented. The room was full of community members, many of them people of color who had their own stories of poor medical treatment. The director, a black woman named Dr. Williams, showed data on the improvements. Wait times were more equitable. Treatment patterns were being monitored. Complaints were being taken seriously. But she also acknowledged the work that remained. "We're not perfect," she said. "We still have doctors who need more training. We still have staff members who make assumptions. But we're committed to doing better. And we're committed to transparency." During the question period, someone asked, "Why should we trust that these changes will last?" Dr. Williams pointed to David in the audience. "Because people like David Thompson are watching. Because this community is watching. Because we've learned that hiding problems doesn't make them go away. It just makes them worse." After the meeting, David shook hands with people he knew and met new people who wanted to thank him. One older woman hugged him and whispered, "My grandson was treated better at that hospital last week than I've ever been treated there. That's because of what you did." Driving home, David thought about his father who had died of a heart attack before proper treatment. He thought about all the people who had suffered in silence, who hadn't had the tools or the platform or the community to fight back. He couldn't change the past, but he had helped change the present, and hopefully the future. When he got home, Angela was already asleep. David quietly got ready for bed, then lay down beside her. His chest still bore the scar from his surgery. Sometimes he touched it, reminded of how close he had come to death, but mostly it reminded him of what he had survived, and what he had built from that survival. In the morning, he would wake up and teach. He would continue working with the patient advocacy group. He would answer emails from other activists across the country who wanted advice on fighting medical discrimination in their communities. He would keep speaking at medical schools, training doctors to do better. The work wasn't finished. It would probably never be completely finished, but it was happening. Change was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but really. And it had started with one man who refused to accept that his pain didn't matter, who had the quiet strength to turn his anger into strategy, who understood that the most powerful resistance wasn't loud, it was thorough. It was undeniable. David closed his eyes, feeling peaceful. Tomorrow he would continue the work. But tonight he could rest, knowing that he had made a difference. That somewhere, a patient was getting better care because of what he and others had fought for. That somewhere, a medical student was learning to see all patients as fully human. That was enough. That was everything.